welcome to SPTV Live this Wednesday evening. That's the first time I've used that new intro video. What do you think, Mark? Do you like it?
It was great. It was hilarious.
Oh, it's such a catchy theme tune, and I really enjoyed recording it. It was a good project to work on.
I don't know how you do this stuff. It's really, really, really well done.
Thank you. Well, I think I'll probably be using it a lot more as an intro, and I thought this would be quite a good one because you are a power thetan, and I thought it would be a good one to use because today, for those of you watching, I'm speaking with Mark Fisher from Our Scientology Stories Peeling the Onion, because it's not very often someone speaks to you, Mark, about your story and your experience. I know you're on Pile on the Ghost channel the other day, but I thought it might be interesting to hear your story for once, because I don't hear much of that.
Oh, that's great. I appreciate it. Yeah, normally I'm the one asking questions and keeping the ball rolling and, keeping the trains running on time. So it's kind of fun to, give my opinion and tell my story too.
Absolutely. And you worked very closely with David MIscavige, the leader of the Church of Scientology. And I think it's we were talking just before you went live about the video you uploaded earlier to do with David MIscavige's end goal and his plan. And I thought it'd be interesting to talk to you about what it was like working with him personally, because I never had most Scientologists don't have, contact time with David MIscavige. He's very protected and isolated. What's he like as an actual person when from your experience?
Well, I mean, like most people, he's many different people. I mean, I first met him when he was 16 years old and I was 17 years old, and I had just graduated from high school and joined the Sea Organization down in Clearwater, Florida. But the opposite was true for David MIscavige. He dropped out. He was 16 years old and he dropped out the month before because he wanted to join the Sea Organization. So he never finished high school. And we were roommates up on the 9th floor of the Fort Harrison Hotel in Clearwater. And I met him for about a month, and he was a nice guy, wanted to be cool, a guy's guy, you know what I mean, hang out and that type of thing. But I could tell at the time that he was driven, even though he was just starting. He was doing the EPF, which is the States Project Force, where basically when you first join the Sea Org, you listen to the Welcome to the Sea Org tapes, which are a bunch of lectures by L. Ron Hubbard, and then you do manual labor normally. But since we were both in the Commodore's Messenger Org, that entailed doing laundry for the senior messengers and cleaning their rooms. And he had just graduated from that when I got there, so I then went in from there. You could tell he was a go-getter, but he also was an a-hole as well. I saw that being exhibited early on too.
Yeah, I think a lot of people say a similar thing. He has not necessarily multiple personalities, but multiple facets of who he is. And sometimes he could be the nicest person on earth and, giving you nice gifts at Christmas or birthdays and being, kind and caring. But the majority of the time he was actually quite vicious and nasty and not a nice person. And I think those good bits of someone's personality doesn't justify or allow the harmful and negative aspects, especially considering what David MIscavige is being accused of at the moment with human trafficking and abuse and intimidation and all these other things that we hear a lot about. That to me signifies that guy he's not a good guy. He's actually a nasty piece of work.
No, and just to summarize basically my experiences with him, just quickly, I didn't see him then for a few years, and he had gone off to La Quinta to work with L. Ron Hubbard and the senior messengers. And then he got onto the movie shooting crew with L. Ron Hubbard, and he took over running the camera, the movie camera. And but he wasn't a senior messenger. I mean, we did a whole video on that series with Janice. I mean, Janice, her sister, and Annie Broker, and a handful of messengers had been with Hubbard since the ship. And David MIscavige was really just somebody who handled the traffic, the administrative stuff coming in and out. But he was known for getting things done, and he basically was somebody you didn't want to mess with. So he built his reputation like that. And he was known for getting things done. That's why he eventually was in charge of in the Guardian's office when that was taken over after Mary Sue Hubbard and everybody was sent to jail. Hubbard decided that he wanted to clean house in the Guardian's office because, they were doing things that he apparently didn't agree with. So Miscavige was the one who was chosen to run all the people that went in there to dismantle the Guardian's office. But they really didn't do it. They set up the Office of Special Affairs, as we all know, and it's just the Guardian's office in a different name. They continued doing the similar type things. They just weren't infiltrating the U.S. government. So,
that we know of.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's something that runs true with a lot of stuff that Scientology do, and a lot of things that David Miscavige is responsible for. If you look at the RPF, the Rehabilitation Project Force, that's another example of how Scientology, we're hearing, have disbanded and got rid of the RPF. But that doesn't mean that it's not still happening, just under a different name, because the policy is the policy. L. Ron Hubbard wrote it down and said, this is how you must act or behave in this situation. This is what the RPF is. This is what the Guardian's office is meant to do. It's fair game. And policy is that you cannot change that. You can't alter or interpret LRH tech. And so therefore they might publicly say there's no RPF, or they might publicly say there's no more Guardian's office, but that doesn't mean that they can't do anything about like what they're supposed to do about the policy. It will still be going on, just like Guardian's office is now OSA. On paper there's no Guardian's office, but that doesn't mean they're not fair gaming people and they're just using a different title. I'm sure it's the same with the RPF as well.
Yeah, and another perfect example of that is the fair game policy. I mean, all they did was cancel calling it fair game. If you actually read the cancellation policy letter that they use in legal cases and saying, oh, we canceled fair game. No, it just says in the policy that we will no longer call it fair game.
Yeah.
They still do the same stuff. I mean, it's happened to me and you and everybody. It's crazy. So, yeah. The tiger doesn't change his stripes, as I like to say.
Absolutely. And I think I'm really interested to hear about your personal experiences on this, because I don't actually know too much about your story. As you say, you are normally the person that interviews other people rather than being interviewed yourself. Similar to me, I'm used to hosting the channel and asking other people questions. So I'm actually really interested to hear about your story. I understand you worked quite closely with David Miscavige. Is that right? Like later on in your SEAL career.
The last 6 years that I was in the Sea organization, I actually was in charge of his personal office at the secret gold base at Gilman Hot Springs, California. Basically in 1983, I think it was 1983. It was 83. L. Ron Hubbard wrote to David Miscavige. David Miscavige at that time was the actual chairman of the board of the Author Services, which was L. Ron Hubbard's for-profit author, handling his literary works like Battlefield Earth and Mission Earth and that type of thing. And it was his personal staff. All right. They weren't Sea Org members. They were actually being paid as regular people. They got paid salaries and bonuses and all that. So he was chairman of the board of that. Okay. But he also was still in the Sea organization, and he was known as the special project operator or special project ops. And so he would go in and execute L. Ron Hubbard's demands or orders in Scientology. Now, Hubbard at that time was in hiding. He had been, hiding from the IRS and from various different people, and nobody knew where he was except for a few people that were with him. And Miscavige was the person who was the communication line to Hubbard. He would meet with Pat Broker at undisclosed locations, coffee shops, truck stops, you name it. And Pat Broker would drive miles to meet up. And that was the connection. That's how Hubbard got his information. Anyway, Hubbard wrote to David Miscavige in 1983, like a dispatch, and it said, hey, listen, you're doing a lot of things for the Church of Scientology, but you work for me in Author Services. And he goes, in order to keep corporate integrity, the church should set up an office for you, sort of a corporate liaison office that can handle what they called your service facility, basically your personal items, your personal needs, your administrative needs. And it could be set up where people in author services like Marty Rathbun, who was over legal, or other people who were over finances and things like that. They could have somebody in the corporate liaison office that they could issue orders or talk to, and then that person would go into the church and actually take care of it, right? So he said, check it with the attorneys, set up an office and do it. Well, I, at that time, was in the Religious Technology Center at the beginnings of it. And I was the person who approved all of the management telexes and traffic. And I approved all the evaluations that were done on organizations. And the person who was in charge of Religious Technology Center at that time was a lady named Vicki Asnaran, and she suggested me to David MIscavige. All right, and so I actually was interviewed by David, and then I was picked to be in November 1983, and so that meant I worked with Dave, and I also worked with Shelley MIscavige, and my first order of business was get an office up here set up for us for Dave and Shelley, and also the one he could share with Pat Broker, and then also one for myself, and then get a staff. So we set up an office. We renovated two units in the middle villa at the Gilman Hot Springs, and no expense was spared. It wasn't like palatial, but it was nicer than normal Sea Org offices. And we were at the beginning of computerization, so we had computers and we had a Xerox machine, and it was basically myself. I had another guy who worked as a programs operator under me, and then I had a woman who was handled the administrative duties around the office, and then also hired Marty Rathbun's wife. Her name was Jory is her maiden name, but we had, when I say hire, I mean I picked them and they were in the office. They weren't actually interviewed and hired. But anyway, since Marty was in LA and she worked at the Gold Base, it just was thought to be easy to have her work for me, and then she could provide laundry and room service and food and whatever Dave and Shelley needed, because they were mostly in Los Angeles. When they came up to the Gold Base, then Jure would come up and handle that duty up there in the Gold Base. So I did that, and I was in that position for 6 years.
Wow. I think that's something that a lot of people don't realize is David MIscavige is the leader of the Church of Scientology, chairman of the board. He's now been at the helm of Scientology longer than L. Ron Hubbard ever was, because L. Ron Hubbard died in 1986, and it's now been more years since then, or since David MIscavige took over, than L. Ron Hubbard was ever alive and doing Scientology. And I think a lot of people think of him as the leader that was chosen by L. Ron Hubbard, and he was, there's lots of statements on the website that it was his personal decision for David to take over, but that's not the case of actually what happened. And what you just described of the relationship between L. Ron Hubbard and Dave MIscavige is very much a position of he gets things done and he has his role, but it wasn't the intention for him to take over. You were there when Dave MIscavige took over and kind of usurped control, right? What was that like from the inside?
Right. Well, I forgot to mention just one thing. One of my duties was I basically was David MIscavige's right-hand man at the Gold Base, because he was in Los Angeles all the time. So any movies, any audio, lectures, cassette production, anything having to do with the Gold Base, it was my responsibility, and he held me responsible for taking care of that for him. And I did that for 6 years. Okay. Anyway, back to your question. L. Ron Hubbard died in 1986. David MIscavige was still in the same positions that I mentioned earlier. But, L. Ron Hubbard died, and he'd been, MIscavige didn't even know where he was. It was Pat and Annie Broker and another guy named Steve Foff, who we called Sarge. They were the ones who were with Hubbard in Creston, California at that ranch. And about a week before Hubbard died, people were called out up there, but not MIscavige. It was Ray Midoff, who was the senior case supervisor international. He was called up there to deliver processing to Hubbard. A doctor was called up there, and another person was called up there to basically handle security. And when he died, they called and they had an attorney come up there and to deal with what are we going to do with the body? What's going to happen with all that and stuff, right? It was at that point that MIscavige actually went there for the first time. And he was the channel between, like I said, L. Ron Hubbard, communications wise. This is way before the internet, way before cell phones. It was all written dispatches. You typed dispatches on computers, printed them out. They were put in bankers' boxes, and then those bankers' boxes were transported, and that's how communication was done back and forth to Hubbard. Anyway, it was believed that Pat and Annie Broker were going to be the ones who were going to take over because they were the ones who were with Hubbard at the time when he died. And that carried on for about 3 or 4 months until the point where Norman Starkey had been assigned to be L. Ron Hubbard's the person in charge of his estate, right? And he was a flunky basically for David MIscavige. And there was an internal battle behind the scenes between Pat Broker and David MIscavige and Annie Broker. Annie Broker was in charge of Religious Technology Center, and she had her loyal people in there like Vicky Asnaran and Jesse Prince. And then David MIscavige had his side of things, which was Mark Yeager, who was the Watchdog Committee chairman, and Guillaume Laserve, who was the ED International. But the main thing that MIscavige had was he had the attorneys on his side because he was handling the corporate and the legal sort out. So the corporations were set up in such a way that basically MIscavige controlled things. Pat and Annie Broker, they'd been off the lines. They hadn't been seen in 6 years. So they didn't know any of the legal stuff that was going on and all that. So the main thing that MIscavige had to get control of before he could take over was L. Ron Hubbard said there was OT 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. Well, they had to get a hold of that material, and Pat Broker had it hidden away somewhere. So that took about a year in order for them to finally figure out where it was and actually get it back from them and get rid of Pat Broker. And that's when MIscavige could finally take control. And when that happened,
so you think those documents do exist, OT 9, 10, 11, 12? Because
well,
I was under the impression they don't.
Well, I'll tell you exactly what they were because they were delivered to me. There were filing cabinets, 3-drawer filing cabinets, about 10 of them. Okay. And in the middle of the night, I get a phone call in my bedroom. And this is, like I said, before cell phones. And it was David MIscavige. He goes, "Hey, Mark, it's Dave." And I said, "Hello, sir. What's up?" And he goes, "Listen, I need you to go up to the L. Ron Hubbard safe room." We had a safe room for L. Ron Hubbard, which was basically where his private documents and things were kept. And I had access to it. And he said, "Listen, I need you to go up there in about an hour. You're going to meet Marty Rathbun and Norman Starkey up there with a truck. And it's going to be full of filing cabinets. And they're going to be put in the L. Ron Hubbard safe room. And I want you to then change the locks and the access codes so that only you know them. And you are not to tell anybody, including Pat or Annie Broker or anybody, what those codes are." And so I was there when they wheeled the documents in there. Now, I didn't see them, but what it turned out that they were just L. Ron Hubbard's processing folders, as we called them, auditing folders. And so there were notations. There was no like written out, this is OT8, written out, this is OT9, this is OT10. So they had to figure this stuff out. And that's one of the reasons why when they released OT8, they had to redo it because people had, terrible results on it, So it was basically up to Ray Midoff at that point to put this stuff together. And then MIscavige has held out the carrot, to all these donors and everybody. "Oh, we're going to do OT 9 and 10 when every org is up to St. Hill size, or when we have ideal orgs in every city." In other words, it's just a carrot. It's a bluff. They don't have anything.
Yeah. And that carrot dangling at the end of the stick is always changing. It always used to be that OT 910 will be released when all orgs are a St. Hill size, which is the same size as St. Hill was back in the day when it was thriving and L. Ron Hubbard was there, which is, can be determined based on a number of factors. Do they mean turning over that amount of money or square footage or traffic or whatever? That always changes. But when I was in Scientology, it had changed again. And it was more when all current orgs are ideal, that's when OT 9 and 10 will be released. And I'm sure when that happens, they'll come up with another excuse as to why they can't release it, because they simply don't exist. If you're saying
Well, no,
it's
it's exactly
just a filing
right.
cabinet of notes, right?
Yeah, it's just Miscavige can dream it up if he wants to. There's no way to prove that is what it is. Look at, he's already done that already with the golden age of technology in the late 90s, which I'm sure you've heard about, right? When I heard about it, and we heard about it, years later, because we weren't involved in Scientology, almost fell out of my chair. I couldn't believe that they redefined what a floating needle was, and it completely changed what the end phenomena was when you were doing Scientology processing. And it completely changed what L. Ron Hubbard said was the end phenomena of any Scientology processing. So he's already up to it, and he's already been doing it for years with his updates of the basic books. Oh, we're editing it. There was grammatical errors that L. Ron Hubbard missed and everybody missed in all these years. It's all a bunch of crap, because it's just basically to get people to buy them again and a way for them to make more money.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting. Like when I was in Scientology, I was there for the Golden Age of Tech 2 release. And I remember it being this huge event that was like mind blowing. And I remember being really excited about it and being like, well, this is so cool. You know, there's like this new e-meter and we're training people like we've never trained them before. And this is how it really is supposed to be done. And I, believed it, because that's what David MIscavige said at the event, is that he's uncovered all of these inaccuracies and these problems, and he's fixed it, and now it's how it's supposed to be. But
Right.
I didn't know that that wasn't the first time David Miscavige has done and said that. And I don't understand how people currently in Scientology, who have been there since the 70s and 80s, are still able to back David Miscavige up when he says these things, because he said it multiple times with the Golden Age of Knowledge, the Golden Age of Tech, Golden Age of Tech 2, and now the Golden Age of Admin, which is currently ongoing. Miscavige is changing things all the time, and he always uses the same excuse of, oh, I've uncovered that there were mistakes, or an editor changed stuff, or lost documents, or this was said it was written by L. Ron Hubbard, but actually it wasn't, and we've now uncovered the handwritten notes, or whatever excuse he gives. And you can kind of believe it if he only says it once, but he's been saying it a lot and changing a lot of things. How do you think people can justify in their heads backing Miscavige up when they've heard this excuse multiple times?
Well, from what I can tell you is that it's all a facade. It's like a movie set. You see this beautiful movie set, and you open the door, and there's cinder blocks holding up one wall. Okay, he's all about how things look and appear. Okay, that's why they have these ideal orgs they spend millions of dollars on renovating, and you can't have any public in them until they're palaces, and they've spent all this money to set them all up, and then they're empty, because that's what they are. They're just empty. It's a facade. Okay, when L. Ron Hubbard, look, whatever you believe about Scientology or L. Ron Hubbard, all I can tell you was, when I got in the 1970s up through the 1980s, Scientology was expanding. It's not like it is now, which is basically declining. And it's for several reasons that it's declining. But one of the main things that was happening in those days is that L. Ron Hubbard didn't care what an organization looked like. He just wanted it clean. He bought old buildings. He didn't want to buy palaces. And he wanted old buildings in heavy traffic areas like Tottenham Road or whatever in London, right?
Yeah, Tottenham
Where
Court
there's a
Road.
lot of people where you can get them into Scientology. And that's what he wanted. I mean, the ideal organization that they have here in Las Vegas, it's on a side road in an old neighborhood. And if I told you how to drive and get there, you wouldn't be able to find it. I mean, it's just crazy. So Miscavige keeps all of these old time, like, the really wealthy ones who are donating lots of money. They've been in Scientology since the 70s and 80s when L. Ron Hubbard was around. Okay. And they're all getting old now. They're now in their 70s and 80s. And they donate because they believe what L. Ron Hubbard's mission was and what he was trying to do. And the way Miscavige keeps them on the hook is, we're opening up an ideal org in Austin, Texas. We're doing this. We've got the golden age of tech. We're putting out, L. Ron Hubbard's materials the way he wanted them. And that's all it is. See, when we were running, when I was in Scientology and managed, when we were managing Scientology organizations to grow, the push was on delivery. You're delivering Scientology technology. That means getting people in the chair with an auditor, a processor, and delivering well done auditing hours, they were called, or getting students in the course room and completing courses, course completions and student points. And then if he said, if you push the delivery, you'll get the income. And that was basically how the organizations were run. Miscavige, because he's never run an organization in his life, okay? He's never run a class 4 organization like London. He hasn't been in charge, okay? He doesn't know the first thing about doing that other than just running people by fear and intimidation. That's how he gets things done, but it doesn't last. It's just a facade. And that's why these people continue to follow it, because they believe in the dream that L. Ron Hubbard says. They don't know about the confidential materials because they're not allowed to look at them. They don't know about the internet and what's on the internet because they're not allowed to look at it. Okay. And then they go to these glitzy events or see them on TV where Miscavige is making up things out of whole cloth and just saying these wonderful statistics and how we're expanding all over the world. It's the emperor has no clothes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens after the IES event that's happening in next week, in fact, because this is the first time David Miscavige is coming out in front of a huge audience of this many Scientologists in like 4 years. Certainly the first time he's coming to the UK in a long time. And he will be speaking and reassuring lots of Scientologists that he's still in charge and there's still lots of stuff going on and Scientology is still expanding. But I think it's one of those opportunities where he could be honest and say, due to everything being locked down over the last, period of time because of the thing that we can't talk about too much on YouTube, because it will block our monetization stuff. But if you use that word, but he could come on stage and say, look, we had to close orgs for the first time in history because everything had to close down. And so we lost some members. And I think Scientologists would be very well receiving of that because they'd understand, because everyone lost business and lost money and lost time during this time. But there's no way David Miscavige will ever do that. He will always come out on stage and go, we had to close orgs, but now since we've reopened, we've had 10 times the amount of people walking in or something. There's always got to be this sensationalist kind of claim. But anything they can do to sell Scientology, make it seem like it's the best thing ever and it's really helping humanity. And I think that leads into my question, talking about your story, which is the main reason I thought I'd bring you on today, is what is it that got you into Scientology, or what is it that kind of was your personal first hook as to why you joined and then continued and joined the Sea Org and so on in Scientology?
Well, I joined because I was 14 years old and my dad had gotten involved. Okay. And I'm actually, it's a good setup for on Saturday. I'm going to do a video on my channel about my father and Scientology and cults. Okay. My dad was a retired naval officer. He was in his 40s when he read Dianetics. Bought it at a drugstore and read it. And then he was always searching for the answers to life. Anyway, to make a long story short, he went into the Scientology organizations in Washington, D.C., started getting processing and started getting training. And after about 6-8 months, he said to me, he said, look, I'd like you to come with me. And I think this is something that would help you. Okay. Because as a 13 and 14-year-old, I was a much different person than I am today. I was very shy. I was very introverted. I cried very easily. I got bullied a lot. And, although I was smart and I was a good student, I wasn't happy. So when he took me in there, he paid for me to get some processing, some Scientology processing, just a life repair is what it was called. And I picked up the cans. I didn't even know what it was about. But then the auditor, who was a really nice woman, she started asking me questions, and I started looking at things, and I had realizations. She had what Hubbard called a real end phenomenon for whatever it is that they were doing with me, where my needle was floating and I was blown out of my head. And I thought, wow, I'd never really thought about that way, what they call a cognition or realization. And that hooked me as far as that goes. I thought, oh, I want more of this. I want more of this. And then I did, the basic communications course and the study course that were done. And I was thinking about this today because I knew we were going to be talking about it. Whatever you think about the communications course or the study course, it was helpful. Okay. But Hubbard, I was thinking about this. Hubbard really didn't invent looking up words and clearing the definitions of words. He didn't invent people going out and looking at an engine, a motor of a car, if they were studying how to repair it, or the fact that you don't start with algebra when you haven't learned basic mathematics. He didn't invent any of that. But what he did do was place an emphasis on it, an emphasis that you don't see in other schools and other education, which is that it's very important that you don't go past a misunderstood word, or you lose your track and you get disinterested, you fall asleep, and you do that, and all of a sudden you become a believer in that, and so you follow that and you do that. It was the same thing with the communications course, where they teach you different principles about how to communicate with people, and it was helpful. But the processing was really what got me and got me hooked at that time. And like I said, I was 14 years old. My dad would not pay for my processing because Scientology believes in exchange, meaning like you're out exchange. If I just pay for this for you, you're not going to appreciate it. So in the summer times, I worked as a lifeguard as a summer job, and I earned money. And then in the fall, I would pay for my own auditing at the Washington, D.C. organization. Now, in those days, 12 and a half hours of processing was $500. Okay. But because I was under 18, we're going to give you a 25% discount. I think I paid $375 in intensive, right? So I could earn $3,000 or $4,000 in the summertime. And then in the fall and winter, after school, I would go and I got through my lower grades on the grade chart, which is the beginning processes of Scientology. And they changed my life for the better. Okay. So I'm a proponent of those things, right? I eventually, when I got in the C organization, I did my OT levels. I got all the way up to the solo Ned for OTs, OT7. And I was on that for a few years, right? But in retrospect, that was a bunch of crap, including the OT3 stuff, right? It didn't really change me. What changed me was the basic stuff. And that's why I decided that I wanted to help people, and I joined the C organization straight out of high school rather than going to university.
I think a lot of people, I think that's very true what you said. I think firstly it's interesting you're 14 when you joined, because I was 15 when I joined Scientology. I didn't join because of my parents, but it was around the same age. So it's interesting that hearing you talk about how you enjoyed it, and there was that hook of the processing, and I want more of this, because I certainly felt that as well. And I think the introductory courses, you're absolutely right, there are a lot of basic life tools in there that do genuinely help people, but the difference or the problem I perhaps would say is it's not necessarily all brand new to Hubbard. It's just he repackaged things or presented things in such a way that it sounded like, wow, this is a really great technology, or this is mind-blowing stuff. No one ever teaches you how to communicate, or no one ever teaches you how to study properly, so this is changing my life. But actually,
and when you're 14 and 15, you believe it because you don't know any different.
Exactly. But actually, when you look at it, he didn't really come up with much that was new. He just kind of looked at other stuff that was out there and put it into a system that, when presented as the solution, makes sense. So, studying and misunderstood words, it's very
that's why I said he put an emphasis on it, meaning like, this is important. And because you were in courses and stuff like that, it's followed to the T because it's very important in Scientology. So that's what I mean by that. He didn't invent it, but he put an emphasis on it.
And also he packaged it in a way, like if you think about when it's generally understood in schools, in education, everybody generally knows that if you're learning about something, it's good to try and get a full understanding of it. And if you're learning, to use the car analogy, or a motor engine or something, if you're learning about that, you probably would learn better by having one in front of you than just reading a book about it. That's a generally known principle of education, that it's good to have the thing in front of you that you're learning about if you
Right.
possibly can. And theory alone is not something that results in a full education. But what Hubbard did was really refine that and call it something, lack of mass. And he said the cause of any problem in study is a single word that you've gone past and misunderstood. Now, in reality, if you read a word you don't understand and you don't look it up, that's not going to put a mental block to you fully understanding the topic ever again, which is how it's kind of presented in Scientology, that if you do that,
Right.
you're never going to understand it. That's not true. But he really refined it and packaged it, like you said, and put a lot of emphasis on it.
But I'll give you an example though for our viewers. Many as presenters on these shows, we fall back into Scientology language without trying all the
Yeah.
time. And it actually upsets them, because if I start talking about an ARC break, you and I understand what that is, but people don't understand it, and
Yeah.
then they're not interested, or they don't understand what we're talking about. And it's the same. I'll give you another funny example. I never read the Harry Potter books. I went and saw the movie, right? And I fell asleep within the first 15 minutes because I didn't know what a muggle was. I didn't understand what the wizards, the different things that they talk about in the books. So I had to have somebody explain to me exactly what all these different things were. Verbal technology, which is not okay in Scientology. And then I went back and watched the movie, and then I could enjoy it.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing, is like, it's that as an idea makes sense, but like the way Hubbard presents it is like the only way you're truly going to understand anything is by doing this.
Yeah,
That's
no, I
where
agree.
Scientology then becomes damaging and harmful, in my opinion.
Well, and like you've pointed out before, the really damaging thing is saying, like, I'm the only one who knows, and you do what I say exactly, and don't question me. That's the authoritarian part that's completely out of bounds.
Yeah, absolutely. What was it like for you? Like, is a big step going from being a teenager that joins, because I've gone through the same thing. I joined Scientology as a teenager and I was like, oh, these are interesting tools and this is helpful. And to then joining staff. And then I signed my SEAL contract. I never arrived, but I kind of went on the early part of that process of like going from joining to committing my whole life to this thing. What was that journey like for you?
Well, it actually is interesting because I was a really good student in high school. And when I graduated, I had been accepted at 3 major universities in the United States. And my sister had gone to university, and that type of thing. And I was the year before I graduated, I was hanging out at the Scientology organization in Washington, D.C. And I met Greg Wilhare and his wife, Sandy Wilhare, who was pregnant at the time with her future son. And they had been sent from the Apollo to work in Washington because she was pregnant. And I'd never met anybody like Greg Wilhare in my life, And so he had a huge influence on me because he was very A to B, as we call it, very with it, very on top of things. And to the point where I wanted to be like him. He was sort of like my little role model. So when they talked to me about, you could go to college, but really, wouldn't you really want to help mankind? I mean, they push that button, about, yeah, I really do. I really want to help, the altruistic, sort of airy
I had
fairy, like, this
exactly
is
the
what you
same
want to do.
thing. Yeah.
And so I went, I got to sign $1 billion in your contract. Yeah, I get to be with Hubbard. I get to go to, at first I thought I was going to the ship, but then they opened up the Flag Land Base, and so I'd be going to Florida. So I thought that was great. But I'll tell you a funny story. I was in for 30 days. That's when I met David MIscavige. And I got in an argument with somebody when I was doing the maid's work and the cleaning work, not because I did something wrong. Somebody else didn't clean somebody's room properly that was on the team. And so we all got blamed. And I thought, this is completely not okay. I don't agree with this at all. So I had to do, amends projects, that type of thing, when I had nothing to do with that room. Well, that's not the team viewpoint in the Sea Org, right? So I rebelled against this and I got kicked out. They decided, oh no, this guy's too hard to deal with. So they put me in what was called mimeograph files, which was basically all of L. Ron Hubbard's issues were printed on an old mimeograph machine, and they were filed in these huge filing cabinets. And I was in there and I was filing paper, right? And there was a woman who was in there who was in charge of that area. And we're talking, and she's filing stuff, and she's having me file stuff. So we're talking, and I said, "Oh, so where are you at on the Scientology bridge? What's your case level? In other words, how high are you?" She goes, "Oh, I'm on OT3 and OT4. I'm like up on the OT levels." And here I am down low on the bridge, and I'm sitting here filing paper, and this OT3 is filing paper. I went, I've made a big mistake. I'm not just going to sit here for the rest of my life filing paper when I could have gone to university, So I left. Wow. I routed out. I left the Sea Org at that time. I had a $3,000 freeloader debt. I went back home to Washington, D.C. Now, my father at that point was the executive director of a Scientology mission in New Jersey, and my parents had gotten divorced. He couldn't have anything to do with me until I handled my freeloader debt. And so I tried to hang out with the people that I knew in Scientology in Washington, D.C., and they had disconnected from me. And it hurt me as a 17-year-old going, the people, that I wanted to be with would not take care of me. And $3,000 for listening to a bunch of L. Ron Hubbard lectures in 1976, that was a lot of money. Anyway,
how old
to make
were
a
you
long
at that time?
17, almost 18 years old.
Still a teenager. So that's a lot of money for a teenager, $3,000.
Well, particularly back in 1976, you could buy a brand new car for $3,000. But I'd never worked in the real world other than just a summer job. So anyway, make a long story short, I decided, I made a mistake. I'm going to pay the debt. And I did. I paid, I arranged, I worked hard, and I paid the $3,000. And then I had to do ethics conditions, and I got back in good standing. And I went and I moved up with my father up in New Jersey at his mission. And I thought, this is good, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, make a long story short, after about 6 months or so, I thought, I've made a mistake. I need to go back into the Sea Organization. Really stupid, right? Really dumb. And so I did. I ended up going back into the Sea Organization. I was sent out to Los Angeles to do some cleanup, and then I was at the Flag Land Base, and I was there until 1990 when I finally left. So, I should have seen the writing on the wall at that time and said, no.
I think I wouldn't be so hard on yourself, Mark, though, because it's not stupid. Because I understand it, having done it myself. I was kicked out and rejoined as a teenager, and around the same age as well. I was 16 when I got kicked out and rejoined, when I was 17. So I understand it, because Scientology, they plant seeds of doubt in your brain. And I was talking to someone about this earlier today, the idea of certainty. Scientology gives you certainty. It makes you 100% sure in whatever it almost doesn't matter what it is, as long as you're 100% certain about it. And because of that, when you then come out and start living a different life, you question things and you kind of go, is this really the right thing? Am I really doing the wrong thing here by not being in Scientology? And you start questioning yourself, and they've planted seeds of doubt. So eventually all it takes is a phone call from the right person at the right time, and you'll rejoin, because everyone in that organization is so certain that what they're doing is the best way to help humankind and the best way to clear the planet and make the world a better place for everybody. And who wouldn't want to be a part of that? That's how the guilt trip is. That's how they got me to sign my SEAL contract. You want to help people. This is the best way of helping people. Why wouldn't you?
And then there's another part of the story as to why I joined that I've never told before, but basically I just thought of it, right? So when I was out and I was living with my mother in Washington, D.C., and I was like on the fence in terms of what am I going to do with my life? I couldn't go to college, university now, all that. Anyway, a friend of my sister's, I have an older sister. She's no longer with us, but I had a friend of my older sister came to visit her in Washington, D.C. It was a friend that she knew from Hawaii when we used to live in Hawaii. Anyway, I'm not going to go into the details because I don't want to get you demonetized, but she decided to end things, if you get my drift, in my mother's apartment. Okay. And that really upset me too. I didn't want to be around that. And I was thinking society's going to hell. And you know what I mean? So it had a profound influence on me as well, thinking I made a major mistake and I need to go back because I need to help people. I don't need to be sitting here taking care of myself. So that also was figured into my decision.
I think Scientology preys on vulnerable people and people in vulnerable situations. And if you look at, there's definitely a common thread among most people who join Scientology. Obviously, it's different for people who are raised in Scientology and had no choice in the matter. But people like yourself who, you know, were young when you joined, but then there was a point when you were out, and then you made the decision to come back. That
Right.
happened, and Scientology came in at the right time because you were vulnerable. You were going through
Hmm.
something traumatic. That's a horrible thing to have gone through, and I'm so sorry for your loss. And the
Yeah.
response to that shouldn't be, what Scientology do, which is coming in and trying to make it all about them. It should be compassion and empathy, which are two things that don't exist in Scientology. But
Right.
if you're in a vulnerable state and you're questioning things and you don't really know what's going on, there's confusion, there's upset, and you're asking yourself questions like, why did this happen? Well, Scientology comes in and goes, well, we have the answers. This is certainty here. And so you can see how people fall into the mindset that Scientology is helpful.
There was another aspect of it too, which I took to when I joined the Sea organization, particularly since I went to Flag in Clearwater, right? And I was thinking Hubbard's going to be there, and then he wasn't, and then I wanted to be with him and all that. Is at a young age, at 17, 18 years old, in those times, you were given huge responsibilities, and there was kind of a 007-ish aspect of the Sea organization. Like you're going to be sent on mission to Copenhagen to deal with the situation. And as an 18, 19-year-old, wow, you know what I mean? That's pretty cool. That's much cooler than what my other friends are doing, right? And
And
then
you get to wear a
eventually
uniform. You get to be in the Space Navy.
wear
Like,
a
cool, man.
uniform
Yeah.
and all that, yeah. And so there's like a kind of cool, and it actually toughened me up discipline wise. I must say I was undisciplined. I was a good student, but I was undisciplined. If something was difficult when I was a kid or a teenager, I quit. That was my first response. Well, in the military, they toughen you up too, and in university you probably toughen up too. But it toughened me up being in the Sea Org. But anyway, but then when I finally got out to the Gilman Hot Springs, the Golden Era Productions, oh, they're making movies. They're recording music albums with these fabulous studios. I'm responsible for setting these things up and putting them together. I mean, I was 24, 25 years old building a music studio and overseeing the whole thing. Who gets to do that at that age? Oh, I'm meeting Chick Corea, one of the greatest jazz pianists ever. Oh, that's John Travolta. I'm dealing with him. How the heck did I get to do this, right? So there was an intoxication from that side of things. But then there was the other side of it, which was working for Miscavige, because you had to deal with his insanity,
Mm.
which was a lot less in those days, but it was still there.
It's interesting you telling your story like that because your dream is what they sold to me, right? That's how they got me to sign a SEAL contract, is going, look, you can go and work at Gold and you can do creative things and you can help in the, audio visual department, making music and films and be really creative and have this really great life. And at the same time, know that every single minute of every day that you're doing this, you're helping people. And you're like, wow, like who wouldn't want to do that? That sounds fantastic. But in reality, when you do join staff, when you do join the SEAL, that's not what reality is actually like. What was it like for you after once you had rejoined and you were in for quite a few years after that point? What happened? What was
Yeah.
your life like?
Well, I was in Clearwater. It was actually pretty good. Sterling Tompkins, his father, Foster Tompkins, he was my first senior in the Sea organization, and I worked in external communications, and I did really well right away. I mean, literally, I did really well, and so I kept getting promoted. I then became an L. Ron Hubbard communicator, and I was in charge of the hotel and the estates area of the whole Flag land base, right? And so when L. Ron Hubbard wanted something done, it was my responsibility to get it done. And then from there, I always took advantage of the fact that we got 2.5 hours of study time. And so I was there to become a full-time Scientologist, so I didn't skip. It wasn't like in those days we weren't working around the clock. Okay. So, but I would, you were required 5 days a week to go for 2.5 hours. I went, I did all my administrative training, my organization executive course, my flag executive briefing course, the data series evaluators course. I did all of those on my 2.5 hours study time. And you probably know a lot of people are sent from the outer organizations to do this training at Flag, and they're on it full time. Well, I did it over 2.5 hours a day, and I got through and I passed this stuff. So I got promoted into management by the time I was 22, 23 years old. And then I had an aptitude for what they call the data series. And I'm doing evaluations, analyzing statistics and doing evaluations to the point where Hubbard approved mine. And he said that this guy's a good evaluator. And then I was bumped up to, let's have him train all the other people because they can't seem to figure out how to do it. So then I was made the person who was training and then actually approving the evaluations for every organization in the world. And Hubbard turned the hat over to me. So as far as evaluation and data series and all that, I was basically like the senior case supervisor international for that. And that's how I eventually ended up in Gilman Hot Springs and in our Religious Technology Center in 1982, 83.
That's fascinating. And like, it shows how involved Hubbard was in the actual running of Scientology. And it's much the same as David MIscavige now. Like, David MIscavige runs Scientology, he micromanages it. And it really was Hubbard's way of managing as well. He was involved in picking staff to do certain things. And, he was responsible for the organization, but he was also very much in charge. Miscavige will say publicly, no, he's the chairman of the board of the Religious Technology Center. He doesn't have any say or interaction with the daily goings on and to-do lists with, the church. He's not involved in day-to-day management. But it's a lie. He completely is.
He controls everything.
Yeah.
I know, because when I was in his office, every decision had to be approved by him, from the finest little detail. He wouldn't give you responsibility that he couldn't approve. Hubbard was a little different. Of course, Hubbard was away. He was hiding, but he would let you basically give you the job and then let you run with it. And if you messed up later, then you would get corrected or whatever. But that's not how Miscavige is. He's completely 100% hands-on everything. And, that's just how he is. Yeah.
How did you get from being an evaluator, in charge of all the evaluations and all this? How did you get from there to working in Dave Miscavige's office?
Well, as I mentioned before, when this thing came down from L. Ron Hubbard about setting up a corporate liaison office, I was in charge of evaluation and all that, and Vicky Asneran recommended me for that. And so,
because of how good you were in your evaluations post, right?
And everything else, right? And so I was chosen for that. And I lasted longer than anybody working for Miscavige at that time. Now, since then, he's got Larice and his other assistants who've been there for years, right? But basically, I could put up with him, you know what I mean? Like he would get angry, and I realized that he was angry about whatever it was that wasn't done. He wasn't angry at me personally or at the person he was yelling at. So I was like the good cop. He'd go in and he'd say, this, that, blah, 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 blah. You guys have, you're not getting this thing done right, blah, 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 blah. And then he would leave. And then I'd just sit down with the staff member, because I'd never yelled. And I said, look, let's figure out how we can get this done. All right. And so I was really good at what they call debugging, meaning taking out the bugs or the things that were in the way. And I said, what is it that you need? How can we get this done? How many people do you need? And that type of thing. And I would take care of it. And then Miscavige would be happy. And that would happen when he, in his office, he'd have something in front of him. He'd be yelling, Fisher, get in here. And then he'd be yelling. And I'd go, sir, I'll take care of it. I'll handle it. And if he continued to yell, I'd say, I'll handle it. I'll let him know. I'll go take care of it. And I built up a reputation with him of being able to take care of things and get things done so he could rely on me. And that's how the people that last a long time with him, they're people that will do what he wants Now, he's gotten crazier and crazier over the years because he constantly would change what he wants. He would say, I want blue. And then people would do it in blue. And then he'd come down and he'd say, I told you I want it in pink. And what are you supposed to say? Well, sir, you told me you wanted blue. I said pink. And these people are so, locked up in their brains that they go, yes, sir. We're sorry, sir. I'm sorry. I did it wrong. I didn't read your mind carefully, So he's gotten completely crazier and crazier. And it was when I saw that he wasn't playing by the same rules we were. And when I started, I was physically attacked by him. And when that happened, then I went like, he's not playing the same game. I'm out of here the first chance I can get. That's when I finally escaped. The only problem was I was married, and my wife of 6 years, I couldn't get her to go with me. And it took 3 times I escaped. And finally, the third time I left for good. And the prior 2 times I came back because I didn't want to leave my wife, and they turned her against me at that point in time. And it took time and, effort. And, I finally left in September 1990 because I saw the writing on the wall at that time. I said, I'm not putting up with this crap, And then it's funny, years later, Amy Scobie told us, oh, it's a good thing you left when you did because here's the musical chair incident. Here's this stuff and all that. I'm going like, that's nuts. And it made me wonder, why are these people sticking it out when that's going on, So anyway, so that's when I finally left in September 1990 because I don't want to be a part of it. I wouldn't. He physically attacked somebody like in his office in 1984 when I was working with him, and I was in there with Shelley and me. But as soon as he jumped across his desk at this person, he didn't hit him. But Shelley and I went, Dave, stop. And we grabbed him and pulled him off. And he came out of it, right? Well, that's not what happened later on. Later on, people wouldn't stop him. And he would just go crazy, So anyway, that's kind of like how I ended up. Now, after I left, of course, which is a whole nother story because I know we're at the end of the hour here. We were fair game big time after we left and, for years and years and years. And, we can definitely, anytime you want to, if we want to take viewer questions or whatever, and
we can go over it. Like, I'm not pushed for time. If we can carry on.
No, I'm not either. It's just your show. I don't want to, I could talk about so many things. But that's the basic nutshell sketch in terms of how these things went. Anyway. So
I think it's interesting what you said about initially what you were saying about you were the good cop. You went in after David MIscavige and kind of said, right, let's work this out. How are you actually going to get it done? And that shows to me that you are a good leader. And you were leading with empathy and going, okay, guys, how can we realistically make this work? What do we need to do? This is what we need to get done. What do we need to do to make it happen? But understanding people's considerations and feelings, perhaps. And that is a sign of a good leader. And I find it fascinating that David MIscavige, you were saying earlier, got known by L. Ron Hubbard for getting things done. And that's what he was very good at doing. But now he's getting other people to do the work for him who are better leaders and actually more empathetic, and he just sort of stands there and calls the shots. And it removes.
And he also claims credit too.
Yeah, and just takes the credit for it, exactly. And I think that he lives in a bit of a silo where everyone around him says yes to him because A, they're afraid, and B, he's like the Pope in Scientology. He's the leader of the church, and he's got people to believe he was hand chosen by L. Ron Hubbard. That's a lie, but that's what Scientologists believe. So they think this guy's really important. So you're not going to stand up to him and say, you're a dick, or you shouldn't have said that, or that upset me, or that hurt me, because that's just not the sort of conversation you have with someone of that stature in a religious organization. It's wild. How do you
it's funny, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was just going to say, I had a realization years after I left Scientology, because after I left Scientology, I had various different businesses that I worked in, stuff like that. And it's funny how like people rise to their, you ever heard the term rise to your level, right? For some reason, I always ended up being the second in command to the person that I was working for in the company.
Mm.
And I would be the person they would rely on. It happened in 2 or 3 different instances. And I thought back and I went, well, maybe that's what I'm good at. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm not the person who's good. I was never promoted to be the boss. I was always the deputy boss. You know what I mean? And it's funny, I'm thinking, well, maybe that was my level in life, you know. Now I'm retired, but you know, and it's kind of like that just seemed to be where I ended up.
I think it's two different types of personality, isn't it? There's like people who get things done, and then there's people who are good at like, being the public leader. Because if you're the leader of the CEO of a company, you're responsible for the whole performance of the company. You're responsible for the public image, and you have to be the public facing boss. And then the
Right.
deputy might be more behind the scenes getting things done. And it's just a different type of personality that's good at that sort of job, right? And
Yeah.
yeah, that's interesting that that's kind of the roles that you've had in your life are all kind of
Yeah. No,
similar.
I look back on it. You know how you look back on your life, and I thought, I always rose to like second banana, second command, which I don't mind.
Yeah.
I'd never really aspired to be the top banana, but it's just sort of like people would hire me and they would move me up to that position, and then that would be it. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And I do well at it, but it was like I didn't. Why don't you go run your own office and we'll set you up and all that? And those opportunities never came.
Mm, mm. How did you mentioned your escape in Scientology a
Mhm.
second ago. How did you escape? Because I know you've got a really interesting story there. And secondly, how do you think David Miscavige reacted to that?
Well, it is a long story. I'll do it very briefly. My wife at the time, she was the Watchdog Committee member for Golden Era Productions for years, and she got sent to the Rehabilitation Project Force in February of 1990, and I was working for Miscavige, and it was complete. I worked with my wife Julie all the time, and I knew it's bogus, but he wasn't the one who sent her. Somebody else sent her, but I knew he was the one behind it because he's the only one that makes decisions on stuff like that. And she got sent, and it was completely off policy. There was no committee of evidence. There was no nothing. So I resisted, and I was came to her defense. So I basically was removed and put doing manual labor for a few months, and shown my place and that type of thing, right? And then I got my security clearances, and then eventually I was put back on my position. Well, in May of that year of 1990, my wife's younger brother, who was not a Sea Org member or Scientologist, they lived in San Diego, he was getting married. And so the family wanted us to come to the wedding. So I could go if I wanted to. That was not an issue. But, my wife was in the Rehabilitation Project Force. So I had to get permission for her to go with us. And it was approved because her other brother, who was in the Sea Organization, he was a security guard at the Gold Base. So I was like, she's not going anywhere. So anyway, so we went and we spent the weekend down in San Diego, and I had been away from my wife for about 4 or 5 months, and I missed her, and I still was so upset about what happened to her. So we spent the weekend together, and then on the way back, there was something happening, which Mark Headley and I will go into at the Gold Base at that time. He had just arrived, Mark Headley. But anyway, I got a page from Shelley. In those days, we wore beepers. We didn't have cell phones. I had to pull over, find a payphone, call her. Miscavige was at the Free Winds, and he was coming back, the Scientology ship. He was coming back a day early. And I was expecting that I would be back, in time before he got back, and it wouldn't be an issue. Well, he's coming back tonight. So on the way home, driving back to the Gold Base, the whole time I was in turmoil. I was thinking, God, I'm going to get in trouble. But you know what? I want to be with my wife and this and that. What am I going to do? And I went, I know. I'll just go and be in the Rehabilitation Project Force with her. Well, what's a fast way to do that is to what they call leave, unauthorized leave. So I dropped my wife off at the base because I had a car, and I had carte blanche privileges there. I had my own car, and I dropped her off. I went up to our place, packed a bag, drove out, told security I'm going into town. They're not going to stop me. And I went and got some cash, and then I went on the run for 3 days. basically. And I knew what they did to follow people and find them. So I stayed at the best hotels. I paid cash under an assumed name. I didn't use credit cards. I didn't go, I went where they wouldn't expect. I didn't go to motels. I went to really nice hotels. And my whole intention was I was going to come back and they would put me in the rehabilitation project force. So I went shopping for black clothes and boots, and I was expecting to come back. And I went to the movies. I said, well, I'm going to be in the RPF for a while, so I may as well go see the movies and all that. So by the time I came back, MIscavige had been told, when he found out that I had blown, that I'd left, he's like, I'm going to send him to the rehabilitation project force. But then he found out that that's what I wanted. So then it was like, oh no, the rehabilitation project force is too good for him. So when I got back, I got assigned as the deputy de-weeder. Okay, never to be the de-weeder in charge on a 500-acre property. Basically, I was pulling weeds. And this got put out to the entire base, right? Because I was highly respected by everybody because people liked me. Anyway, so he basically was knocking me down a notch. And I went, okay, fine, whatever. And I was going to get my act together and get back with it. But what they did then after that was they put out an issue and they canceled everything I had ever done in Scientology. All my training, all my auditing, everything was canceled, okay? And it was done completely off policy. And so I was crushed. And then that's when I started thinking, you know what? If I got to start over, screw this place. I'd rather start over out in the real world, and I'll just start over there. MIscavige is out of control. And, I'll just do that. Anyway, so that's the end of that story. Shortly thereafter, he beat me up, right? And then I decided, again, when there was a famous flood that happened at the base, and MIscavige was foaming at the mouth. And I left again, right, with my car. I drove away again, but without my wife. And that's turned out that same night, Janice Grady and her husband, Paul, they thought the same thing. They left the same night I did. And they made a mistake. I went out to Los Angeles, and my sister, who was a public Scientologist, I had nowhere to go. I was in turmoil. I went to her house and I told her, I said, look, I can't tell you what's going on, but I'm leaving Scientology, or the Sea Organization. And so I went to sleep. And by the time I woke up, they had contacted her and they sent security knocking at the door to take me back. And they made the big mistake of telling me that Janice and Paul Grady had left the same time I did. And then I thought, okay, I'm not crazy. I'm not the only one who's seeing this, because a lot of times you think you're crazy. That's how Scientology, you're responsible. You're crazy. But then, Janice was somebody I highly respected, and her husband, Paul, and her sister, Terry, had left before, and she was highly respected. I went, okay, I'm not crazy. So the next chance I got to leave, I finally left in September 15th, 1990. And in order to do that, they had taken my car at that point, so I didn't have it. But I had my wallet and credit cards. Anyway, I escaped from a motel unit that we were living in at the time in the town, and I missed the bus on purpose. And I went and got a taxi, went to a local motel. And I called him up and I said, you either give me my stuff or I'm going to the police department and I will be there at 12 noon with the police. And I'm serious. And they took it seriously because I knew they would react that way. They would take me seriously. So that's what happened. They brought me in, and Gary Jackson Moorhead, he was in charge of security. And I met with him, and my wife was there. And basically I made up an excuse saying, you cannot talk to your spouse or anybody about leaving or that. So she had no idea what was going on, other than they told me that was bad, So I told her, I said, look, I'm going to leave. I want to have kids. I just made up an excuse to tell her. I wrote her a check for half the money in our bank account. I took the car. She goes, I want the car. I said, I just gave you $8,000. Okay. Go buy a car. And I said, you can have all the furniture and everything else. All I need is the car and my clothes. And that's what I did. And that's when I left.
I think it's such a good example of how the way Scientology controls your mind and your beliefs, because most organizations, if you look at it as like a normal job, as employment, right? If you have a bad day, you're fed up with your job, and you go to your boss and hand in your notice and say, I'm done, I'm leaving, they go, okay, thank you very much. You know, your end date is in 2 weeks or a month or however long your notice period is. Thank you for your service. Sorry, it didn't work out. And you can walk out the door. Or if you just wake up in the morning and think, I'm done with this, and don't go to work, obviously your employers won't be happy, but they're not going to come after you, or you, like,
With
the fact
security.
that, exactly, the
They're
fact
not
that
going to
in
chase you
order
down
to,
like a dog. Yeah.
yeah, the fact that in order to leave Scientology, you have to resort to such drastic measures of give me my stuff back, or I'm, going to sue you, or the police are going to be there. Like, this is the sort of the fact that you can only leave in those circumstances shows how controlling Scientology is, especially in that upper management Sea Org sort of area. And I think it's right through the, I think it's integral to the way Scientology is around the world, because it's part of the belief system, is to keep on to people and make it the only solution, the only workable technology. And if you're not, if you're not on board with us, you're against us.
Right.
And I don't like that mentality. It's totalitarian, it's extremist. There is no room in Scientology for people to say, look, this just isn't working out. I still support you. I support your beliefs and I want to be a Scientologist. I just don't want to be scrubbing the decks and being beaten up by the leader. People should be allowed to make decisions like that. But no,
But
because the
again,
policy
Hubbard,
says win or die in the attempt.
that's right. And Hubbard, his policy was, if you leave, you're an enemy, basically, and that's why there's disconnection and all this other suppressive people and all that jazz. To basically give a short synopsis, 2 weeks after I left, Janice contacted me down in San Diego at my ex-wife's father's house, and said, Mark, we've been looking for you. And this is the days before the internet. I mean, you used a phone book, And I said, Janice, how you doing? And so the next day I went and met up with her and her husband, and then her sister Terry and Terry's husband. They came out from Florida, and we had decided to go to Las Vegas and go into business at that time. A business that we were going to work for. And that's how we got started, And the funny thing is that when we all left, we still were true believers in L. Ron Hubbard and Scientology. We needed to peel the onion, as we call our channel, because when I left, my viewpoint was MIscavige is nuts. Because if Hubbard was there, and if he found out, and this is my past history with him and everybody else's, MIscavige would have been shot from cannons. You know what I mean? He would have been removed so fast over what he was doing, right? So we just thought, we were true believers. We thought, well, L. Ron Hubbard's going to come back. I mean, that's how we were. We were true believers. So we'll just wait till he comes back, and then we'll come back in. And that was our viewpoint at the time. But then it took time, slowly but surely, peeling that onion, where we started going like, hey, there's a real world out here. As a matter of fact, the real world's actually pretty cool. They're not enemies, and they're not people that, we can't get along with, and we could do business with them. And then I read Russell Miller's book, which, I mentioned on John Poe's channel a couple of weeks ago. I read that book in 1993, and it totally changed my viewpoint in terms of what I thought of L. Ron Hubbard. And slowly but surely, you kind of come out of it, and it's taken a long time. Now, in the meantime, we had MIscavige sending in private investigators to, spy on us and hire people to spy on us for years, for like 20 years, that was going on. And they did all sorts of dirty tricks. I guarantee you they did stuff to try and sabotage our businesses. And it wasn't until recently that Mark Headley, sent me his spy files from 2006, where incidents that happened in my life, sure enough, they were written up in a program for Office of Special Affairs to execute. So, that's basically, where I got it. And then I finally I started speaking out earlier, you know what I mean? And I always was anti. Back in the 90s, there were old guard people who spoke out, Robert Vaughn Young and Stacy Young, and they were really good friends of mine. And I was with them, and I would be behind the scenes. But now we did our channel because I'm retired. I don't have anything to lose. I could care less what they think of me. I don't care less what anybody thinks of me. I know who my friends are, and I know what they, I know I'm a good person. So that's where I'm at right now.
And how have you, for those of you watching on my channel, there's a link in the description. Mark and Janice have a channel called Our Scientology Stories Peeling the Onion, and it's fascinating. I find some of the stories that you've
Please
covered.
subscribe.
Yeah, go and give them a subscribe. You speak to a lot of people about the history of Scientology and people in the past who perhaps haven't spoken out before, and I find it fascinating learning about the things that haven't changed about Scientology over the years and the things that have, and all of the bad bits seem to have stayed and the good bits seem to have gone, or at least been diminished. And I think it's fascinating. What have you learned from doing your channel? Because there's a difference between speaking, like leaving firstly, and then speaking out. That's a big difference to make for someone leaving Scientology. It's a big step. You can leave and not speak out, and that's absolutely fine. There's no pressure on anyone to speak out publicly, because it takes a lot of courage, and it's a big step mentally as well to put yourself in a position where you're denouncing your former faith that you believed was 100% the only way to help humankind. So that's a big step anyway. But then secondly, from speaking out, however many years you've been doing that, to now having your channel and like interviewing other former members, what's that been like for you? What have you found interesting about that?
Well, it's been fantastic, because we just started it up because we thought, well, we'd like to tell our story about what it was like back in the 70s and 80s, in terms of, why did we get involved in Scientology? A lot of the channels, and not a criticism of them, right? They didn't get into Scientology till after we left, till after L. Ron Hubbard was dead, till after all this other stuff was going on. Do you know what I mean? So I thought it would be important, and Janice did too. Let's tell the story of what it was like. Why did Scientology? It was growing. It was the fastest growing, quote unquote, religion at the time. Why were people getting involved? Smart and intelligent people. And it gave us a platform. Janice has connections with everybody who used to be in, where they would feel safe speaking out for the first time and telling their experiences. And what I find, and what we find is that the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing in Scientology. So years ago, something could have happened to somebody and they have no idea why that happened. So our channel has given closure to a lot of people,
Yeah, I definitely agree. And just
about the
hearing
abuses and the other things that happened to them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's really, really important. I think hearing other people's stories helps you figure out in yourself what's happened. With you,
Yeah.
you left Scientology before I was even born, but the story that you gave about, how you were recruited into the Sea Org is almost identical to mine. And I think the more people that speak out, the more people are going to be helped by that, because
Yeah.
it's another interpretation, and people will be like, oh, I've heard that before, or that's similar to my story. And that's what I love about your channel, and it's absolutely helping people and making a difference without a doubt.
Thank you. The other thing too is that I wanted people to learn about these important people in Scientology.
Yeah, because
And what they did and why they were doing it. They weren't doing it to be a suppressive cult. You know what I mean? They weren't doing it to hurt people.
yeah, I think
And
that,
their stories deserve to be told. So that's what we do.
yeah, absolutely. And
I'm
people,
sorry. I didn't know I was going to get emotional like this.
no, Mark, it's absolutely fine. It's a big thing. It is really emotional to talk about. I think Scientology takes away your voice, right? Scientology stops you from thinking that you can speak out and talk, because you can't discuss your feelings, you can't discuss your emotions, you can't discuss how something makes you feel, or how you feel about something, or think about something that you've read. So it's really powerful to come out and find that voice again in yourself,
Yeah.
and give other people a platform to do that, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's been great. I mean, we're having a lot of fun. We laugh. There's a lot of stories that are funny, a lot of funny things that happened, and like we laugh about it now. At the time, maybe it wasn't so much fun, but it's great. And hopefully we're getting the word out to other people too, because I don't want people to fall into the trap. I think the positive aspect that we're having is that less and less people are getting involved in Scientology. And, but by the same token, on our channel too, this, there were positive things that I got out of Scientology, and I'm not afraid of talking about them, because if it was all bad, nobody would have gotten involved in it in the first place. Okay. It's like anything, you know what I mean? If you start eating candy, boy, that candy tastes good. But after a while, your teeth rot, then that there's a problem, So anyway, that's how we're doing the channel.
Yeah.
And then I have my other channel too.
Yeah, I think, it's also really important that you share this emotion, right? Like, you don't need to apologize. You said a second ago, sorry, I didn't realize I was going to get that emotional. Don't ever apologize for it, because actually, by showing your true self and expressing those emotions, people will identify and relate to that. And that in turn helps people figure out what's happened to them wherever they're at in their journey. It could be someone who left Scientology 20 years ago and just hasn't even thought about it and recognizes a name like Mark Fisher, Janice Gilliam Grady, or, Robin Scott, who was on your channel recently. Like, they might go, I remember that guy. And, hadn't really thought about Scientology for years, watch the video, and they might realize, oh my God, that's what happened to me, or that answers a question I had, or finally, this makes sense to me. I'm sure there are hundreds of people watching your videos and being helped by that content. And that's what spurs me on to do, SPTV. And I think any of the creators, we want to just help people find that closure and help people come to terms with what happened. And also raise awareness that all of these things are happening around the world at every level of the Scientology organization.
Yeah. And then the other aspect of it too is kind of predicting how David MIscavige and Scientology will react to current situations, because there's a pattern and we've been through it. So, Mike Rinder can tell you about it. I can tell you about it. Mark Headley can tell you about it. Claire Headley can tell you about it, because we lived it. You know what I mean? So, that's why the video I just did yesterday about what's David MIscavige's end game, because I started thinking about it, right? He's 63 years old. All right. I'm 65, so I'm a couple years older than him. But I have friends, including Janice's husband, passed away at 66 years old, just a couple of years ago, who had been in the Sea Org for a long time. I've had other friends that did the same thing, right? And so there's no guarantee that he's going to be around forever. And so then I also laid out that, he smoked 2 packs of unfiltered Camel cigarettes a day when I worked from the time he was 16 all the way till when I left when I was 32. He was smoking like a chimney, right? He drank coffee. He not only was doing that, he had chewing tobacco that he used chewing tobacco if he wasn't smoking. All right. He had asthma. I forgot to mention this in the video, but he had asthma his whole life, right? And I guarantee you, he was deathly afraid when we had the pandemic, right? The organizations were closed down and actually, kept spotless, overly spotless. And I guarantee you, because he's afraid that he's going to catch it, and that's going to be the end of him. So who knows how long he's going to be around, number one. Number two, has anybody seen anybody that he's grooming to take over? Is there anybody in a deputy position that's going to be the face of Scientology going forward? I don't think so. He's a big narcissist, right? So I spell all this out in that video called David MIscavige's Endgame. And I made a prediction in terms of what I think is going to happen going forward, because he's got a lot going on between the different civil lawsuits with Leah Remini and then the Danny Masterson, aftermath. And then he's got his wife, Shelley, who he's got hidden away, and that's a stress point for him in terms of she can't go anywhere because she knows where everything happens. So anyway, it's nice also to be able to, give some perspective in terms of what might be going on in that area.
Yeah. And I think one thing to consider is David MIscavige is running from process servers in 5 lawsuits alleging things like human trafficking, intimidation, all of this. And as more people start to speak out, more cases will be brought against the guy and against Scientology. I think the narrative has changed. I've noticed over time in the press about Scientology. It used to be Scientology is this crazy, wacky American cult, and at least here in the UK, that's how it's reported. And there were stories over time of things happening that were bad, like Lisa McPherson and so on. But I think now the press are much less focused on the beliefs of Scientology and much more focused on the allegations of abuse and harassment and stuff. And I think the reason that has happened is because more people are finding the power to speak out. And it's because of people like you who have not, who have refused to shut up and not given up in the fight against, no, this is what happened to me. This is the truth. This is the story. That empowers other people to do the same. And I think as time goes on, only more stories will come out. It's going to get a lot worse for Scientology before it gets better, if it ever does get better. I think it's a downward spiral, and the more time that goes on, the more people that speak out, the worse they are going to be seen, because the true depths and extent to which these atrocities are occurring is going to be public knowledge.
Right. And then they're still following the old playbook. They attack, SPTV creators and the moderator and this and that, because they know that they can't really attack people like myself or Mike Rinder. We're already under attack all the time. You know what I mean? So they attack others to try and scare them off. Right. That's their total tactic they've been doing forever. Right. And I see it, some idiot, and I'm not even going to mention his name. He made a comment on one of my videos 2 days ago, which is completely ridiculous. I just block it and get rid of it, because I can spot OSA a mile away with this stuff, because they do the same thing over and over again. So it's important that people know what it is that OSA and these people are going to try and do. But somebody just said the avalanche is coming. Yeah, it's getting bigger and bigger, because what was it? 8 months ago? I started our channel, I think 7 months ago, like 10 months ago. There was 1 or 2 channels that were doing this sort of stuff. Well, now what? Hundreds now? We're getting more viewers than Scientology gets on their big media center, So,
I have more than 5 subscribers for every 1 Scientologist in the United Kingdom, and that fills me with so much joy. I don't know why.
Me too. When we got over 3,500 subscribers, I knew that, that's more people than they can fit in the Shrine Auditorium in Los Angeles or in the Ruth Eckerd Hall in Clearwater for an event. And now we're over 9,000, you know what I mean? So it's crazy,
That's now more than the people, the biggest Scientology event in the calendar, right? If you look at the Ruth Eckerd Hall and whatever capacity of 3,500, the IES event has a capacity of 7,000. Normally about 5,000 people show up, which is, based on historic events. We don't know how many people are going to be there this year, but that's a lot of people. And when you have pretty much double the number of people that they can fit in a tent for their biggest event, it says a lot, right?
I think he had to come out to this event. He has to, because he's been hiding for several years now, since the pandemic, right? And he has donors, I think, that are starting to wonder what's going on with the Masterson thing and this and that. And I completely agree with somebody. The whole Masterson being declared suppressive and all that, that's all an attempt to keep people, on board with Scientology and with MIscavige. And he has to be there. If he wasn't there again this year, people would start wondering, well, who's in charge? What's going on? And that's one of his weaknesses. That's what I in my video, I said, what is he trying to protect? And then what is he afraid of? And one of the things he's trying to protect is his reputation, not just with Tom Cruise and celebrities, but also with the big whale donors in the International Association of Scientologists.
Mark, this has been so fascinating. Do you want to do?
We'll do it again. I enjoy
absolutely.
it. Yeah.
Firstly, let's do a part 2, because I feel like we've only just touched the tip of
Yeah,
the iceberg.
Janice is on vacation on a cruise for another 2 weeks, so I got plenty of time.
Yeah, all right for some. I'm very jealous that you're
Me
sat
too.
there in Las Vegas with all of the lovely heat and being in the desert. And Janice is sat on a cruise ship in the Mediterranean, and I'm sat here in cold, dark, wet, and miserable London. But it's fine. I don't hold a grudge.
Do you mind mentioning my channel? I have a second channel I did for fun,
That's
not as
exactly
on a
why I was bringing
serious
up the
subject.
travels.
Go
Yeah,
right
that's
ahead.
well, that's what I was going to ask. I was talking about travels, and I know you've just launched a new channel. Do you want to tell us about your second channel?
Yeah, I launched it. It's Mark Fisher's Las Vegas Travel and More. And it's just basically a fun channel where what are the things to do in Las Vegas? I've lived here for over 30 years. What's the best restaurant? Where can you go where it doesn't cost you a lot of money? And so I'm doing little videos on that, but not just on that. I did one on Hawaii because I've been to Hawaii many times, and I'm doing other travelings. I interviewed Janice about her cruise, and then I'm putting up photographs from the cruise. So it's a fun channel, and Misha, my dog, is also involved in it as well. So if you want to have fun, go to @MFisherLV. That's @MFisherLV on YouTube. And I'd appreciate it if you guys would subscribe. I just started the channel about, I don't know, 7, 8, 9, 10 days ago. I've already got 360 subscribers as of this morning. And, I'd like, obviously, to get it up to 1,000 and get monetized and all that jazz. But yeah, please, if you would hook up on it. And the other thing that we talked about on it too, for anybody that's interested, is we're going to be organizing up a SP cruise out of Los Angeles here, probably this coming spring. When Janice gets back, we're going to work out details with the travel agent. It's very inexpensive, the cruise is, but it's all inclusive, like a 3-day cruise down to Mexico. It's like, if you want your own room, it's $600, including all your food and all the activities. If you're sharing with somebody, it's $300 a piece. It's just practically nothing. So we're going to do that, and we want to have some fun. So anyway, yeah, if you go to @MFisherLV and subscribe, I'd really appreciate it, and there'll be some fun content on there.
That'll be fascinating. I can't wait. I love your channel. I have subscribed. I put the link in the
Yes, you
chat
have.
for other people as well. And I would
Yeah.
love to see that grow. And maybe we should do another video separately just about your travels, because I love
Sure.
traveling. I've been to a lot of places, some exotic places like China, for example. I've been to the States a lot, and Canada, and a lot of Europe, obviously. So I'd love
I've been
to,
to Asia. I've been to Japan, Cambodia. I've been to Thailand. I've been to Hong Kong. I've been to UK, London. I love London. I'd love to go back. It was so expensive when I went, but when I was
London's
in
not
London,
cheap.
I went. I see why people like living here, but it's very expensive.
Yeah, well, London is not cheap to live in. It's certainly not cheap to visit, considering we are kind of on the other side of the world from you guys. But you're welcome anytime, Mark. It would be great to have you
Absolutely.
here next time you come to the UK. Let me know, and we'll have to meet up and go for a pint for sure.
Absolutely. I would love it.
And I would
The
love to
nice
do
thing
the
is
SPT
that
with you as well.
there's nonstop flights round trip from Vegas to London every day of the week.
Yeah.
There's a nonstop, and that's why I went, because it was like, oh, I don't have to go through any other airport. I can just fly nonstop. It was like, I forget how many hours, 8 hours, 7 hours,
Something
8
like
hours,
that, yeah.
but it was nonstop. It was fabulous.
Yeah, absolutely. And we should totally do a video on travels and that sort of thing. That'd be fascinating. But do you want to do some questions? I've been starring stuff.
Sure.
As
No, I'm
we
okay.
go
Like I
on.
said, I have time. So whatever you want to do.
Awesome. I'll start with this super chat we got in a little while ago from Nancy New 12. Thank you for the super chat. Alex, could you try and do a video of Mike, Mark, and Aaron on Scientology UK property portfolio? I think more people need to know about vast properties empty. Absolutely. That's a really good idea. For those of you who don't know, I have a website called Scientologybusiness.com, which is like a kind of online magazine, I suppose, blog type thing, where I'm writing a lot about Scientology's business activities, its money, and its buildings and property and that sort of thing in the UK and Europe. So there's a lot of information out there. And yeah, I would love to do a video about all of that sort of stuff. And there's some things in the works that I'm sure will come out soon. So absolutely fascinating. Thank you. And SP Chef, thank you for the super chat. Thanks for the lovely chat. And please do another or two together again. That's
Absolutely.
nice. Yeah. Okay, let's go through some.
That's one of the things that's great. through SPTV. I've met great people like you. Janice and I, we think you're very intelligent and very likable person.
Well,
We've met
thank you.
other people too, Kellycopter, Lara FM. It's amazing the people that you meet.
Yeah, absolutely. There's such a community. Scientology make you believe when you leave that the outside world is scary and suppressive people want
You'll be
nothing but
flipping burgers at McDonald's.
yeah, you're just going to be flipping burgers at McDonald's, which firstly, there's nothing wrong with doing that. If that's the
No.
job that you have, that's fine. It's better than being in the Sea Organization. I'd rather be
Yeah.
doing that than working for Scientology. But they make it seem like SPs are these horrible people that all they want is for your, life to be a misery, and they're covertly hostile. Nothing could be further from the truth. This SPTV community is so welcoming and happy to help each other and supportive. I think it's been lovely, and I really like this little community.
Yeah.
PTS for life. Jeff, a good friend of mine. Mark Fisher, the man with the coolest shirts.
Hey, rocking the Hawaiian shirt since I was 6 years old.
Where do you get your shirts from, Mark? Is there a particular
Yeah,
retailer
I buy them when I go to Hawaii, but also online you can get them at Hilo Hattie's as a website, and they make Hawaiian shirts, Hilo Hattie's. And then there's Aloha shirts from around the world. I mean, there's websites where you can order them, and they have all different designs. I've got probably 50 shirts that I've collected. And the nice thing is I wear them when I'm on the channel, so it's great. But I used to wear them when I was working because, when I was doing mortgages and stuff, dress the way you want. But this was my style, so that's what I did.
I love that. Hawaiian shirts aren't really big in the UK because I think we're like on literally the other side of the world to Hawaii, but B, I don't know. I think we're very conservative with a small c, and reserved country. I think so. A lot of people just like my wardrobe is just basically all black and grey.
Well, mine is too. I have that too, but that's why I have a flash of color, so it's easy to find me in a crowd.
Yeah. Oh, I bet. Alrighty. Mousy question mark. What is your opinion of LRH and his status of a convicted in absentia runaway felon? Great question.
Oh, that is a good question. No, L. Ron Hubbard is he has some genius, but he's a madman, and that whole madman or messiah label, barefaced messiah, that totally fits him, like I said, we talked earlier about there are certain things about Scientology that he didn't create it, but it actually worked. Okay. It was stuff that you could learn and you could apply, and that gets you hooked. And then it goes on from there. But then, learning about his 2 wives at the same time and how he mistreated his family, which I observed, and all this other stuff, I go like, this guy's a crazy man, and it took a few years to figure that out. So anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the story you're told in Scientology about L. Ron Hubbard isn't factual. There's a lot of fiction there. They tell you he was a war hero, and they tell you he was a scientist, and all of it. There's a lot of stuff that is made up or exaggerated. So when you actually read Barefaced Messiah or do your own research into L. Ron Hubbard, and you start to realize the truth, you realize he's not all that he was painted out to be. And then things like, convicted of a felony, in France, for example, he was convicted of fraud and sentenced to jail, to prison. However, he never served the term because he ran away from France, and that's why he escaped back to the US and basically stayed there for the rest of his life without leaving the country, because he was terrified of being extradited and having to serve prison time in France. And that's not the only case he was convicted of and found guilty of. And I think these things you have no access to in Scientology. But once you find them out, you're like, wow, this guy's bad, right?
Yeah, and that's actually one of my predictions in David MIscavige's Endgame. I think he's got millions of dollars stashed in Switzerland and Luxembourg. I think if he has to, if there was ever an indictment or a pending indictment, he'd get on the free winds or he'd go to some country. I'll bet you he's already researched what countries don't have an extradition treaty to the U.S., and he'll be like Hubbard, on the run. And my point at the very end is he's eventually gonna die alone. He doesn't have a wife. He doesn't have any real friends, right? He's going to end up hiding. He already is with all the security that he has. He lives in a security cocoon. He can't even come out, when he's going to be at the IS event. He can't go into East Grinstead, not without like all of his armed security guards around him. So he's becoming like Hubbard. He's getting introverted, smaller and smaller, and he's gonna go at some point. He's with all the stress and everything he's got going on. That's my prediction.
And he has the means and the ability to disappear quite literally if he wanted to. He's got access to plenty of money, private planes, and so on. He could very easily just suddenly vanish and never heard from again. You know, which is kind of why it's
like right now, nobody knows where he is. Yeah. Right now, nobody knows exactly where he is because he's living in a cocoon. You know.
Exactly. Danielle Chamberlain here has a really good question.
Hey, Danielle.
Hi, Danielle. We love Danielle. She's great. Question, Mark, if you bumped into DM in the street, what would you say to him today? Would you raise his hitting you?
Yeah, I've thought about that over the years. One of the things I would first of all, he wouldn't sit down I would actually try and, you know, basically point out to him, I say, like, we know what you did. And you're not doing what L. Ron Hubbard wanted you to do. And you are a charlatan and you are a fake. And we know because we know what was supposed to happen. And you are not doing that. And you know, we basically, that would be what I'd be talking about. And then, you know, if we got any further about all the abuses and all that, but just he knows that we know. He knows that we know. Do you know what I mean? It's like when you know that something's wrong, right? And you do it, and then the people who know that it's wrong, and they call you on it. Yeah, they all of a sudden they're like, "Whoa, no!" You know, they run and hide because he's a coward deep down inside.
Vernon Salvatierra question, Mark, why couldn't any of LRH's children challenge David on the takeover of Scientology?
They weren't strong enough and they didn't have the connection, you know, the powered positions to do so, but that mainly they were not strong enough, meaning that they were basically controlled. Hubbard did not treat them well. They were not in positions of power. They were not relied upon because of that. He was closer to his messengers than he was to his own children and family. Janice spent more time with L. Ron Hubbard than any of his children did. And so that's why.
Fascinating. PTS for life again here, Jeff. Question, where do you see Scientology once all these old timers age out? Do you think the younger members will keep it going?
I don't. That was one of the things I said in the Endgame video is that there's nobody he's grooming. At 63, he could drop dead tomorrow, right? Then who would take over? What? All these old people that were my age or whatever, they're old too. You know what I mean? So what? They keep it going for a couple of years and keep things going. There's nobody, all the young people are all people who never were around Hubbard, and MIscavige would not keep somebody around him anyway, because they would never be good enough and he would tear them to shreds. They couldn't stand up to him. So he probably considers, I'm the only one. And that's in his narcissistic view, what he thinks. And I just think when he goes, he's going to go and not care about it.
I think that that doesn't mean Scientology will end, though. I think
it won't end. It won't end. But I just
someone will take over. But I don't think there's a plan for it.
Well, and I wouldn't be surprised if an attorney, some attorney, got involved in taking it over or being in charge of it. Who knows? I'm just speculating. I don't have any information on that. But they're the ones that have the most power in terms of what goes on in Scientology.
Yeah, very true. Alrighty, there's another one here from Cornelius Antonius. Question, who were the couple LRH stole the idea for study tech from? I forgot their names, but I know it was a teacher couple that were in Scientology. I don't know the answer to this. Do you?
I actually don't either.
I don't know. I have to look into it. It's an interesting one. Barb tries... Sorry, just tuned in. Jeff Levin described David MIscavige as deranged, and I like that description. I think that's true. That's very fair. Jeff Levin actually helped produce the music video I played at the beginning of this.
That's
this
great
video. He's great. Witness said laughter is healing.
Absolutely.
100%. And Paula here says nothing wrong with having a real heart and a loving soul. Then Daniel Chamberlain hugs here, Mark. This is when you got a bit emotional. I just wanted to show that there is love and support there for you, Stephen, not to be a biatch, but I love it when y'all get emotional. That's such a natural reaction. It's needing you heal and showing others still in, just left, thinking of leaving, etc., that it's okay to feel. Yeah. 100%. One Love 51,000 question: how hard is it for you both to trust people in general, not knowing if they are OSA? This is a really good question. Do you want to go first, Mark?
Yeah, I get asked this all the time. It's our basic nature when I was in Scientology is that you trusted everybody because nobody would lie to you, because if they did, they would go to ethics and get turned, So I was very naive when I came out, obviously, and then I had different people that became your friends. Now it's really obvious if somebody was coming in. They start asking you questions about things that normal people don't really ask you about. Do you know what I mean? It's like when I say normal, I mean people who weren't in Scientology. But the friends that I have that were never Scientologists, we talk about the weather. We talk about what they're doing at work. We talk about that, not about, what do you think about David MIscavige these days? Which is what the private investigator did when they first came into us. You know what I mean? And how about this? And then I went, this guy's a plant. This guy's a spy. It's questions like stuff like that. Then you go like, no.
It's also like differentiating the difference between someone who's genuinely curious or inquisitive or wanting to help and someone who's OSA. There are some really clear, obvious telltale signs that someone is asking because they perhaps infiltrating or perhaps they're OSA, rather than someone who just genuinely has an interest and wants to know more. It doesn't mean that people can't ask us those questions, because if you are genuinely interested, we can answer those questions. It's not harmful. But it's the way OSA kind of go about their business that's, as a former Scientologist, horrifically obvious to all of us, I think. My answer to that question is, I would always describe when you are in Scientology, you have total 100% faith and trust in the organization and L. Ron Hubbard. You fully believe and agree that this is the only answer to everything. So when you come out or you get kicked out or however, when you leave, it takes a lot to process that and figure that out in your mind of like, hold on, I had this, my total trust was in this thing, and now I'm upset, or now I've been kicked out, or however you left. That trust has been broken. And not only that, those people are trying to destroy your life through their fair game tactics. It's a really tough lesson to learn, that not everybody is out to get you and not everybody is going to turn their back on you at some point, because that's how a lot of people feel when they leave Scientology, is rejection, or feeling like their trust has been broken, because their trust has been broken. So it is really hard to learn to trust people again, and it's a process, and it takes time. Alrighty, where was I at in the chat? Here we go. There's this one. Okay, Tamba Grable. What an amazing chat. Was there any Sea Org members who didn't smoke? I'm excited for your new channel, Mark. I didn't smoke.
I never smoked. I hated, my dad smoked when I was a little boy or whatever. He was in the Navy, and I smoked. And I'll never forget this. I asked him, I was like probably 6 or 7 years old. I said, "What does that taste like?" And he goes, "Here," and he handed me a cigarette, and I took a puff on it. Oh, and it burned my throat, and I had to go to the sink and wash my mouth out, and that stayed with me forever, And then the smoke and getting it. So I just never ever have smoked. My ex-wife never smoked either, but it was really funny. Almost everybody in the Sea organization smoked. She used to come out of Watchdog Committee meetings. I'll never forget this. There was a conference room. The door would open up, and a cloud of smoke would precede everybody walking out. That's how smoky it was. And she'd come home, and she had beautiful long blonde hair, and she goes, "My hair smells like smoke. I've got to wash my hair." It's a dirty habit.
Yeah, I think that I don't judge people who smoke, and it's
I don't
absolutely fine
judge
if
it.
you
It's just
do,
not
but
for me. Yeah.
it's not for it's not for everybody. But I think it is something that does run through Scientology and the Sea Org. Two things: swearing and smoking are two habits a lot of people pick up after extended time in Scientology. We swear like sailors, and a lot of
Oh
them
yeah.
chain smoke. And I think it's because that it's the only like permitted thing, I suppose, that could be considered naughty, in the Sea Org, because L. Ron Hubbard smoked himself. So Scientologists
Yeah.
kind of use that as an excuse as, oh, I can smoke because LRH did. And that's their little, everyone's got their
And
little
then
vices.
then I forgot another thing I mentioned also that I found out after I left Scientology is that David Miscavige drinks whiskey. I mean, sometimes a bottle a night, according to Tom DeVocht, right? Whiskey. Can you imagine? I mean, I was thinking about this yesterday. It's like if anybody had a drink after work on post, they'd be in ethics the next day if somebody saw them doing that, and then they would be, what's wrong with this person's drug rundown, and it would be corrected. It's absolutely abnormal behavior in the Sea Organization and Scientology. Now, since I've been out, do I have an occasional cocktail when I'm out with friends? Absolutely. But I know my limit. I don't abuse it. But Miscavige, this is where he's spiraling out of control, because not only does he does that, he's been smoking cigars ever since he met Tom Cruise. That he got him into that, and if he's drinking whiskey like that, it's gonna progress. It's gonna speed up his demise.
I think it also goes to show, it's evidence that David Miscavige, he considers himself the head of the Sea Organization, but he doesn't put himself in the same category as other Sea Org members. He
No, that
lives
was
his
one of
own
the things that I liked.
he
Yeah,
lives his own special interpretation of
yeah.
the
Rules
Sea
don't
Org.
apply to me. They
Yeah,
apply to you, but they don't apply to me. And that was
yeah.
one of the things that I went, I'm not going to be involved with this anymore, because when you're a dedicated Sea Org member, as we were, you didn't do that stuff.
Mm.
You'd be called out on it, but of course nobody could call him out.
Yeah, he doesn't consider him, like, he will publicly consider himself as a part of the Sea Organization, but the way he actually thinks, he doesn't consider himself subject to the same rules as every other Sea Org member, right?
Yeah, right.
All right, I think last question here before we wrap up. One Love again. Question: who do you think is a madder madman, LRH or DM? Dave Miscavige.
Well, they're both mad, but David Miscavige is sadistic, so he's madder. I mean, full-time sadistic. Hubbard had his sadistic and his mad moments, but he also had his compassionate and other moments. Not that I experienced, but what other people have told me about. And he created this Scientology, which a lot of us got involved in order to try to help people. I don't think Miscavige believes in it. I don't think that he's there to help anybody except himself. And there's a difference. People ask all the time, do you think L. Ron Hubbard really believed what he was doing? Absolutely, I do. He, to the day he died, he still was trying to research and all that. Now, that's crazy, some of the stuff he came up with, but he really was dedicated to what he was doing. I think Miscavige, it's all about image, money, and ego. That's all it is.
Very well put. Mark, look, I was trying to keep this to about an hour, but we're almost at
Sorry.
2 hours. No, I've loved every second of this, and I think this is fascinating, and I would love to continue this discussion with you again at some point if you'd be up for that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And can I mention this coming Saturday, I'm doing a show on my father. I'm going to have photographs. My dad has he's no longer with us, but he has an interesting history with Scientology and other cults. And so I've been meaning to do a show on that now that Janice isn't here. And John Poe is going to be my co-host on it, so that I have somebody to talk to about it. But hopefully people will tune in. We'll do that on Saturday.
Fascinating. That sounds great. I'm looking forward to it. I'll try and be there in the chat if I can.
Yeah.
Everyone watching on my channel, please go and show Mark and Janice some love on their channel. There's a link in the description. Our Scientology Stories, Peeling the Onion, and Mark's new channel, which is his travel channel. Again, there's a link in the description. If you want to support your channel, Mark, how do people do that? Do you want to talk about merch very briefly?
Yeah, well, we have a merchandise site in the description of this video on my site or whatever. There's links to our merchandise. We sell Janice's autographed book. We sell coffee coffee mugs, t-shirts, all that jazz. And so you can do that, but also you can also buy, I just set up buy me a coffee on my in my description on my channel just 3 days ago, and I already got somebody bought me coffee. So that was a nice thing.
Great. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's such a nice little way for people to contribute and help support the channel. I've got the same. If people want to support the channel, you know, super chats obviously help and they are great, but you know, the YouTube take a big cut. So merch and buy me a coffee is such a great way for people to kind of send a little token to say thanks and help support the channel and grow. So same with mine. If you want to support me, there's PayPal, there's buy me a coffee, there's merch, all of that stuff down below. But look, Mark, thank you so much for this. This has been fantastic.
I've really enjoyed it.
I'm looking forward to having you back again very soon.
Okay,
Alrighty.
great.
Thanks, Mark. Cheers.